When the Lord restored Zion, it was like we lived in a dream. Our mouths were filled with laughter, and our tongues sang out for joy. Then they said among the nations, what great things the Lord did for them. The Lord has done great things for us, and we were overjoyed. Like the streams in the desert filled with rain, restore our fortunes, Lord. And those who sow in tears, may they reap with cries of joy. Those who go forth weeping, bearing seed to sow, come home singing songs of joy, bringing in their sheaves. Then they said among the nations, what great things the Lord did for them. The Lord has done great things for us, and we were overjoyed. When the Lord restored Zion, it was like we lived in a dream. Our mouths were filled with laughter, and our tongues sang out for joy. Our mouths were filled with laughter, and our tongues sang out for joy. In case you can't tell, Psalm 126 is my favorite. Many scholars think it was probably written just after Cyrus the Great, the king of Persia, captured the city of Babylon in the month we now call October of 539 BCE. His victory brought to an end what historians call the Neo-Babylonian Empire, which had lasted around 87 years. In terms of American history, that's the same as the length of time between the Declaration of Independence and Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, 87 years. I say that many scholars believe that Psalm 126 was written right after the return to Jerusalem from the Babylonian exile. The truth is, we just don't know for sure. It's notoriously difficult to date poetry or songs unless there's some clear and explicit mention of a datable event within them. And in Psalm 126, there really isn't. Here's what we do know. Cyrus the Great depicted himself as a ruler who restored temples and allowed displaced people to be repatriated to their former homes in the cities he had conquered. This comes from a cuneiform inscription on a clay cylinder rediscovered in the ruins of Babylon in the 19th century. This portrayal of Cyrus, which comes from the Hebrew Scriptures or the Old Testament, depending on your point of view, is consistent with Cyrus's own claims on the cylinder. In the prophecies of the second Isaiah, in 2 Chronicles, and in Ezra, Cyrus is the one who allows the Jewish exiles in Babylonia to return to their homeland. This situation may also be reflected in the opening verses of Psalm 126. Whatever caused the initial burst of enthusiasm had left people feeling like they lived in a dream, or alternatively, like they'd been restored to health, and the Hebrew can mean either. But for some reason, that initial energy had dissipated, the momentum had stalled. Now, the traditional interpretation of the psalm is that the people's initial expectations of the return from exile was along these lines. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away, which is coincidentally my favorite verse in the Bible. It's also Isaiah 35:10, but also 51:11. So it appears twice. But the people's current reality doesn't match their initial expectations. According to the book of Ezra, the returning exiles faced opposition from the neighboring peoples, including the Samaritans, when they started trying to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. In fact, again, according to Ezra, it took 21 years to rebuild the temple, 3 times longer than it had taken Solomon to build the first one. A similar situation from American history is that it was supposed to take the Pilgrims 7 years to pay off their voyage to America on the Mayflower. But it took them 28 due to a string of spectacularly bad luck. And you know about that. Yeah, I figured you did. Fellow descendant. Anyway, we all know what that's like, don't we? We know what it's like to live in the gap between our hopes for the future and our present reality because things didn't turn out the way we thought they would or that we wanted them to. Maybe that's why the psalmist evokes those streams in the desert, which are actually more like what we used to call gully washers. Y'all remember the term gully washers? Uh-huh. They're somewhat heavy rains which do water the soil and allow plant growth, however briefly, but they're just as likely to be torrential and to form raging currents that sweep aside all the obstacles in their way. I recently saw Michelle Obama make a guest appearance on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. I guess it was on the 5th of the month. One of the questions he asked her was whether she was the same person after being in the White House. And this is what she said. You know, after being the First Lady living that life, you are never the exact same person that you were. So I think that I'm a new and improved version of myself. But I do carry the wisdom and the joy of those 8 years, and I hold it in my heart because, as I've always said, it was a true honor. I remind people that being the First Lady allowed me to see the country in a way that most people do not. And what I saw for 8 years, 10 if you count the 2 years of campaigning, was a decent country with decent people that all want the same thing. And it is so important for us to remember that that is exactly who we are. And we have to hold that truth because it keeps me going. Wow. A decent country with decent people that all want the same thing. As it turns out, decency, simple decency, has a long history here in this country. And why shouldn't it? Decency is not just an American characteristic, it's a basic human value. And not just characteristic of modern humans. Decency extends far back in time to the very dawn of humankind. It turns out that our Neanderthal cousins took care of their sick and injured. One of the most famous Neanderthal skeletons, dubbed the Old Man of Shanidar, was found in modern-day Iraq, and he lived between 35,000 and 65,000 years ago. He's notable for surviving a lifetime of severe injuries. He was blind in the left eye from a facial trauma, probably a rock fall, which crushed his eye socket. And he suffered significant hearing loss because bone growths blocked both ear canals. He was arthritic and suffered from a degenerative disease as shown by his worn down teeth and joints. He also had a limp, either from other broken bones or from the degenerative disease. His right arm was severely fractured and appears to have been amputated below the elbow, but it healed in a deformed way, which suggests that he survived that injury for a significant period of time. He lived into old age for Neanderthals, between 35 and 45 years, and this in turn indicates that his community took care of him and provided him with food and shelter for between 10 and 15 years. And the old man of Shanidar wasn't the only one who was taken care of this way. A child's skeleton from a Neanderthal site in Spain shows that she lived to be at least 6 while suffering from severe congenital hearing loss consistent with Down syndrome. That means that somebody helped her mother look after her. Simple decency in action, even back then. Coming a bit closer to our own times, just after the famous Thanksgiving feast in 1621, a ship named the Fortune arrived at Plymouth Colony, bringing more settlers but very few provisions for them. Decency was when William Bradford, by then the governor of the colony, gave the newcomers permission to observe Christmas, even though his church didn't celebrate it. Decency was when Bradford, upon finding these same people were out playing sports in the streets, when he and the work crew came back home in the middle of the day for their dinner, didn't have them arrested or whipped publicly or fined or forced to join in the day's labor, which was probably building the palisade around the settlement. Decency was when Bradford, after all this, still said that the newcomers could observe Christmas as a private day of religious devotion in their own homes. Decency was when Father Maximilian Kolbe, who was imprisoned in Auschwitz because he ran a monastery that did shady things like sheltering Jews and printing anti-Nazi pamphlets, volunteered to die in place of another prisoner because the man cried out in fright for his family when he was randomly chosen to die as a warning against trying to escape. After Father Kolbe had been starved for a couple of weeks, along with 9 other men, the guards decided that they needed the underground bunker where all of this was happening. So he and the others were executed by lethal injection, which is why Kolbe is now regarded as the patron saint of people battling drug addiction and substance abuse. This happened in the summer of 1941. The man in whose place Kolbe died lived another 53 years and was able to attend the ceremony where Kolbe was canonized as a saint by the Roman Catholic Church. Decency was when Wilhelm Hossenfeld, a captain in the German army, was ashamed of his nation's activities and did what he could to resist. Hossenfeld spared the life of Władysław or Władek Szpilman, the most famous Polish pianist of his generation, who also happened to be Jewish, after he found Szpilman hiding in the ruins of a building in Warsaw. If any of this sounds familiar, Szpilman's story is covered in the movie The Pianist. Szpilman had already been assisted numerous times by numerous people by this point. For starters, he was pulled out of a line where he was waiting with his family to board a train for Treblinka, which is where the rest of them died. Szpilman was also smuggled out of the Warsaw Ghetto before the failed uprising in 1943, and he was hidden and fed by various people in the resistance for months. By the time Wilhelm Hossenfeld caught Szpilman trying to open a can of food without a can opener, the Polish uprising in Warsaw, which was after the Jewish one and was inspired by it, had occurred and collapsed in the summer of 1944 and left much of Warsaw a heap of rubble. To demonstrate that he was telling the truth about his identity, the pianist played some Chopin for Hossenfeld, and then the German fed and hid Spielman when he could from September until mid to late December. Sometime between then and when the Russian Red Army forced the Germans to retreat in mid-January of 45 and occupied Warsaw is when Hossenfeld left the city. Decency was Spielman searching for news of his benefactor once he was able. He wrote a book about his experiences after the war and mentioned the German who had spared him. After he learned Hossenfeld's name in 1950, Spielman tried to intervene with the communist authorities to save him, only to hear eventually that Hossenfeld had died in a Russian POW camp in 1952. Decency was when Spielman wrote a letter to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, on behalf of his benefactor's memory. It turned out that Spielman wasn't the only one whom Hossenfeld had aided. There was another man who had jumped off the train to the Treblinka death camp, as well as a number of Jewish children. As a result, Hossenfeld is now recognized by Yad Vashem as one of the righteous among the nations. Spielman's letter undoubtedly was a factor in their recognition of Captain Hossenfeld's efforts. Decency was when a California state agricultural inspector named Bob Fletcher began managing 90 acres of grape farms for 3 local families who'd been sent to the infamous Japanese-American internment camps during World War II. Fletcher used part of the proceeds to pay any mortgages and the property taxes on the farms so that they wouldn't be seized by the bank or the county and sold. Fletcher returned the farms along with the rest of the money to the original owners once the war ended and they were allowed to return. As a result, he faced harassment from his community and even found bullet holes in his barn. Nevertheless, he persisted. Decency was when Princess Diana, right after her marriage into the royal family, went back to the Young England School in Pimlico, where she had worked as a kindergarten assistant, and gave each of the children a piece from one of the dozen wedding cakes. They were several layered fruit cakes, which is why they were still suitable to be given to the kids once she had gotten back from the honeymoon. During that incredible week between Diana's death and her funeral, when the two of us heard about the cake story, Joyce said it was that detail which got to her. Decency was Diana shaking hands with and hugging AIDS patients at a time when people were afraid to do this because they feared catching an incurable disease. Decency was also Princess Diana campaigning against the proliferation of landmines almost up to the end of her life. Decency was exemplified by Father Michael Judge, a Franciscan who dedicated his life to helping the marginalized. One story is that he once gave a woman the winter coat literally off his back because, in his own words, she needed it more than me. According to another story, while Judge was anointing a man dying of AIDS, the man asked him, "Do you think God hates me?" In response, Judge picked him up, kissed him, and silently rocked the man in his arms. On 9/11, because he was a chaplain to the New York City Fire Department, Judge rushed to Ground Zero as soon as he heard about the attacks. He was in the lobby of the North Tower offering aid and prayers for the rescuers, the injured, and the dead, when the collapse of the South Tower sent debris flying into the lobby of the North Tower, killing Judge along with a number of other people. Decency was 4 of Father Judge's fellow members of the FDNY bearing his body away from Ground Zero with dignity, with honor, and with tenderness. The resulting photograph, which still gets to me every time I see it, has been described as an American pietà. Decency was when, in early January of 2011, as a response to a church bombing in Alexandria in Egypt, the previous month, in December, Egyptian Muslims stood as human shields outside Coptic churches so that their Christian neighbors could celebrate Christmas in safety. The tradition of Muslims and Christians joining together to chant "one hand" as a powerful symbol of unity dates back to this time. Decency was on the morning of the 21st of January 2021 when Dr. Jill Biden, the new First Lady of this country, went down to the kitchen in the White House and made a scrambled egg breakfast for the Secret Service agents who had been up all night protecting her and her family, and taking this breakfast to them and feeding them and sitting with them for the best part of an hour and talking to them, finding out all about them, and showing that service goes in both directions. Decency was her insistence that there be no photographers along, and the only reason anybody knows about this is when one of the agents happened to let it slip a few weeks later. Decency is thousands or even millions of ordinary people giving of their money, their time, and their energy to come to the aid of complete strangers in war-ravaged Gaza and Ukraine, or the Sudan for that matter, or those recovering from the complete devastation of their worlds by massive storms in Cuba, in Jamaica, and in western North Carolina for that matter. Decency is people helping those who've lost their homes to fire, which I've experienced firsthand, and for which I'm very grateful. We still know how to do it because we still know what to do. And Judith knows exactly where I'm going with this. Yep. He hath showed thee, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. It was a nationally televised appeal to decency that ultimately helped bring down Senator Joe McCarthy and ended his reign of terror in the 1950s. Who's to say that the same thing won't help to bring us out of this present darkness? Remember Abraham Lincoln's appeal in the last paragraph of his address at in his first inauguration, on the eve of our darkest hour as a nation. We're not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. Overall, I'm thankful for the decent actions every day of ordinary people, many, if not most of whom, act that way without ever even thinking about it. They don't think about the fact that they're responding to the touch of the better angels of their natures. They just respond to the needs they see right in front of them. What was it Jesus said? But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your alms may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. which is Matthew 6, 3 through 4. I'm also thankful for the things people have done to help me over the years, and for the things that some people are still doing. None of us makes it entirely on his or her own. The Lord has done great things for us, and we were overjoyed, wrote the psalmist more than 2,500 years ago. And the first part is just as true today as it was back then. My great hope is that the second part, our joy in response, is just as true, and that it will lead us into gratitude. I began this message with a song, so it seems fitting to close it with part of another song. Back in 1973, that most of us here remember, while this country was roiling in the middle of the Watergate scandal, Paul Simon had a hit record with American Tune, which is set to a melody based on the old hymn, O Sacred Head Now Wounded. Now, if I'm very lucky, some of you might recall that I told you in at least one earlier message some time ago how I really discovered the song a dozen years after that, when I was studying abroad in England and was feeling a bit homesick as the 4th of July approached. I looked all over the ancient city of York for fireworks, only to find out that you can't easily buy any fireworks except just before Guy Fawkes Day on the 5th of November. Anyway, the first part of the song is about the strong emotions that were in the air at that time of our long national nightmare. Simon talks about feeling mistaken, confused, forsaken, misused, weary to his bones, far away from home, battered, ill at ease, that every dream had been shattered or driven to its knees, and wondering just what went wrong. Heavy. But that isn't the last word, which is hopeful, because after all, we're a nation descended from immigrants who came here looking for a better life. We come on the ship they call the Mayflower. We come on the ship that sailed the moon. We come in the age's most uncertain hours and sing an American tune. Oh, and it's all right. It's all right. It's all right. You can't be forever blessed. Still, tomorrow's gonna be another working day, and I'm trying to get some rest. That's all I'm trying, to get some rest.